Morning and welcome to the CalSTRS Compensation Committee meeting. Would staff please take the roll?
Mr. Juarez? Here. Ms. Hendricks?
Here.
Mr. Tang?
Here.
Representing the Director of Finance, Ms. Peralt?
Here.
Representing the State Controller, Ms. Gallegos?
Here.
Chairperson Keeley, you have a quorum?
Thank you, Brandon. And would you read into the record the statement?
I'm sorry, Mr. Gunning? You have a quorum?
Thank you, Brandon. And can you read into the record the statement about public comments, et cetera, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The CalSTRS board meetings are live web streamed, video archived, and available to the public on calstrs.com. Individuals who wish to address the board should wait for the 10-minute public comment period at the end of the agenda item the speaker wishes to address. For comments not pertaining to a specific agenda item, there will be an opportunity for additional statements at the end of the open session. Each speaker is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes to comment. However, if there is not enough time for each speaker to have 3 minutes, the timing will be at the discretion of the chair. Please be advised, while criticism is protected, abusive language and other disruptive behavior that goes beyond protective speech and impedes the meeting's progress may result in the termination of further comment and/or removal if the behavior continues. To protect the privacy of speakers under the age of 18 who wish to address the board, only their first name and affiliated organization may be provided. But other personal identifying information such as their last name, age, or school may not be shared.
Thank you, Brandon. With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda for today's Compensation Committee with some flexibility, please. Sharon?
Second.
It's moved by Sharon, seconded by Ken. Without objection, the agenda for this morning's meeting has been approved. Item 2, Crystal Turco, Maureen Riley, Josh Wilson, and Susan Lemke will be presenting. I just wanted to set this up in terms of how we will proceed. And I also want to recognize 2 members of the board who are not on the committee are also present, our chair, Denise Bradford, and the esteemed Mr. Ruffino. So the item is scheduled for 50 minutes, so I ask our presenters to be mindful of that time so that there's appropriate time for questions, comments, and some dialogue. The way the item will be presented, Crystal Turco will introduce the item. Maureen Riley from McLaughlin, who provided and has for a long time, McLaughlin has been the provider of the data that we received for this item. Maureen will present on the data. So that's section 2 of the presentation. 2A will be any questions that the committee members have relative to the data and the comparative group that McLaughlin presents. We will then proceed and hear from Josh and Susan from Mercer, and they will provide, they looked at the data, they spoke with McLaughlin and Maureen and the staff to verify the data. They will present their findings and 2 recommendations. And after that, we will have discussions on the recommendations. So it's 1, 2, 2A questions and answers, 3 presentations, 3A questions and answers. And then there's next steps, but those next steps are next steps. So the meat is the presentation of the data, then the recommendations discussion. With that, Crystal, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Chair Keeley and committee members. Crystal Turco, CalSTRS staff. As Mr. Chair indicated, I'm introducing the labor benchmark study, an action item that supports the board's compensation policy by ensuring compensation ranges remain aligned with the competitive market. I will not introduce the people to my right, as you already are familiar with those individuals, and Mr. Chair so kindly did introductions on my behalf. The labor benchmark is part of your regular governance cadence and provides market evidence to make informed decisions. The board's compensation policy calls for periodic market pay studies, so salary ranges for positions under the board's authority stay in line with your approved comparator groups and target market position. This preserves competitiveness, supports recruitment and retention, and provides transparency in governance. These studies are conducted on a roughly 2-year cycle to avoid wide variances in market data between assessments. Recent cycles include a study presented and acted upon in 2024, with prior adjustments stemming from the 2021 study. Incentive opportunity levels have not been increased since June of 2019. For this cycle, we engaged with McLaughlin Aon to assemble compensation data using our board-approved comparator groups. For executive positions, the analysis uses a weighted mix, 67% leading U.S. public funds and 33% private sector investment management organizations. Investment positions are benchmarked to a blend of large and complex institutional investors, including top U.S. and Canadian funds, corporate sponsors, and private sector firms. McLaughlin's dataset is industry-leading and broad, supporting comparisons on base salary and incentives across our markets. Today's materials include the final McLaughlin report and a few slides from Mercer to frame the findings for discussion. With that context, I'm going to hand this over to Maureen.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you for having us today. This report will look similar to what you may have seen in the past from 2024. This analysis, we covered 12 executive and investment management positions listed here on the screen. In this, you will see we're covering base salary, total cash compensation, so that's base salary and earned incentives, and as well as, just for reference purposes only, total compensation, which is base salary, earned cash incentives, and long-term incentives. And we'll get into definitions on another sheet. And to Crystal's point, the two peer groups that are used, one for executive positions, we use 67% leading U.S. public pension funds, and a third is weighted towards a broad private sector investment management organizations, what we'll go into in a few slides. For the investment group, we do an equal blend. 50% is tied to large and complex U.S. and Canadian pension funds and corporate plan sponsors, as well as a size-adjusted group for private sector asset managers. And then here we took this from your philosophy. Just a reminder that you target your cash compensation opportunities at the 50th percentile of the competitive market. This is the leading U.S. public pension fund group. You can see we have the 2024 analysis and 2026 analysis. For the most part, the groups are very similar. Due to participation, 2 of the funds, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, did not participate in recent years, and we have since added Virginia and Tennessee. Each of those funds have met the complexity in terms of internal assets under management. You can see here the median AUM for the peer group used is $123 billion, as well as the internally managed assets at median makes up roughly 50% of their overall AUM. For the one weighting 1/3, there's 356 organizations included in this group. So it's a very broad look at the private sector as a whole. When looking at the banks and insurance companies, it is just the asset management business of those banks and insurance companies. And then we're looking at the traditional advisory firms, and then endowments, foundations, and corporate pension plans. For the investment positions, there's the leading institutional managers made up of the Canadian pension plans, a handful of the U.S. public funds, as well as the corporate plan sponsors with a median AUM of $117 billion, with internally managed assets of about 70% of their overall AUM. And then the private sector organizations, this is looking at just the asset management business of insurance companies and banks and advisory firms, but we're cutting out the top end and the lower end. So the $1 trillion asset managers are not included, as well as those with $50 billion in AUM. So moving forward, just as a refresher, when we're looking at this data, the base salary that we are referring to is the most up-to-date salary that we have in our database. That is the 2025 annualized base salary for these individuals. When we're talking about total cash compensation, we're looking at the annual base salary rate for 2024 plus the actual cash incentive earned for the 2024 performance year. And then just for reference purposes only, we've included a look at total compensation. That includes the annual base salary, the earned cash incentive that we had just looked at, as well as long-term deferred awards. Now, within the last few years, public pension funds, there's a handful that have included either an additive long-term incentive plan or have a deferred award program, which is a carve-out of their total incentive. So moving forward, looking at this, the base salary midpoints are listed on the left-hand side for CalSTRS for the executive positions. The maximum incentive opportunity are those percentages that you see there, and then the total cash T-cash, we're referring to maximum total cash opportunity for these roles. So looking at the variance for base salary, we really see a large variance for the CEO and the COO position. Total cash compensation, we see a variance between 5 and 10% for most roles. The general counsel is further positioned from market, but that's a unique position as it's not currently incentive eligible. Looking at the investment management staff, we can see here, you can see the midpoints on the left-hand side, as well as the maximum incentive opportunity for these roles. Looking at just base salary, the deputy CIO role, while it's an open position, currently is listed furthest from market on a salary-only perspective. The other roles that we see positioned further from market are the senior investment directors, the portfolio managers, and associate portfolio managers. On a total cash basis, this group, all roles except the portfolio managers, are positioned greater than 10% from the current market median for total cash. And just as a reminder, these numbers here that you see, these are just for the roles. It's not for the individual employees within each of these ranges. It's just for the role listed, the midpoints. And so for some of these, this is just a visual representation of what we just looked at for the executive positions for base salary. You can see it at the bottom of the bar represents the 25th percentile or the minimum of CalSTRS ranges. The top of the bar represents the 75th percentile or the maximum for CalSTRS ranges, as well as the midpoint and the median is in the middle. Just a visual representation of what we had just looked at. Same on a total cash basis as well. Skipping through total compensation as that is included just for reference purposes. Looking at that data that we saw, if you were to make adjustments to align closer to your philosophy of market median, looking at this, you can see in the blue on the left-hand side are CalSTRS ranges, the minimum, the midpoint, and the max. The variance to market that we had just looked at on the earlier slide, that's 16, 17% below market median. So if you were to make a change to the salary range midpoint, for example, the CEO of 16%, changing that midpoint from 475 to 550, on the right-hand side in that gray column with the green around it, you'll see it would be now positioned 3% below market median. So it went from 16% below to 3% below by making that adjustment. For the COO position, an 8% increase would align closer to the market, as well as making the change for the CFO and the COO to align. Factoring in total cash compensation, when you think about incentives, salaries and incentives, they work in tandem to achieve your overall goal of market median. Salaries and incentive opportunities would say the same for the CEO, COO, and CFO from the above recommendations. When looking at the general counsel and the system actuary on a total cash basis, they're positioned a bit further from market. Looking at these, changing the system actuary from 30% to 40% of incentive opportunity would align closer to market, as well as potentially introducing an incentive opportunity for the GC role. Just to align, this is all what would have to happen to align closer to market median, and just in terms of the market data. Skipping through a few slides, just reiterates what we just talked about. For the investment staff, this is looking at the base salary visual representation to show your positioning versus the current market. Again, you're on the left-hand side in the blue, the market is in the gray. From a total cash perspective, you can see here on the, that your further position for investment staff, which we had looked at from market median. Moving through, from a salary perspective, looking at only salaries, that deputy CIO role that we had said was 17%, the furthest investment role. Again, it's open, but position from the market. An increase of that midpoint to get closest to market of 20% would align right at the market median. And then looking at the senior investment director, the portfolio manager roles, and the associate portfolio manager roles, they're below the market median. And looking at an increase of 4 to 9% for each of those roles would align them closer to market. And again, just in terms of aligning to the market data, increases would have to be made to the incentive opportunity for most positions within the investments, just to align closer to the market total cash compensation. And that would conclude the market data perspective for this, if there's any questions that anyone has.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. Questions from the committee on the Milwaukee data that was just presented? Okay, let me just make sure. Yeah. Sharon?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the quick, I was a little like, wow. I know you're trying to be responsive to us.
Yes.
It's just comp is always a little like, wow, it takes
a
a
lot.
bit. But thank you for all the work. I mean, McLaughlin, you served us well for a long time with the data piece, so appreciate that. My understanding, just so I have this clear, is you talked about base salary and then total salary. So base salary is the amount that, like, their defined benefit pension, I know it's with CalSTRS, right? But it's the base salary of which their, like, retirement is based on, right? Not the incentives, or? Sorry, that's more of a Crystal question maybe
Yeah,
than.
that's not a problem. Yes,
Yeah.
your retirement calculation uses your salary, your base salary. The incentive
salary.
amount is not part of any calculation for retirement.
So when we say total salary, that's base salary plus, like, incentive.
Total cash, I think,
Total
is what you're
cash.
referring to.
Okay.
But base salary is what is used to calculate your retirement.
And then just one last question. I know over the years.
Sharon, 1 second, I see that Cassandra wanted, I think,
Sorry, go
weigh
ahead.
in on it.
Another way to distinguish those, the base salary is what you're paid on your regular monthly cycle. Incentives is pay at risk annually. So it's based on performance. So those are the,
Right, but it's not part of the,
right.
just because we have that kind of a conversation a lot. And then the second piece of the question for me, and I know we've had conversations over the years around comparator groups, but I continue to sort of wonder, I'm curious about using you said 33% is private sector investment manager, and I just continue to kind of wonder, why we do that, why we use private when that isn't typically sort of reflective of who we are at CalSTRS, and why a third of our competitor group is a group that I wouldn't say is similar to what a CalSTRS is like.
Sure. No, that's a great question. And it makes up a third because it recognizes the market that is out there. The true labor, in the sense of the true labor market for investment managers that is out there. And it's weighted 1/3, as 67% is made up of what is closest in likeness to CalSTRS. And that 1/3 is if you were to recruit or try to retain your employees, or if they were to leave, you wouldn't want that, but if they were to leave, that is the market that they could go to, or where you could recruit from. So that's why it's not 75% weighted there, but that's why it's a third to the private sector, to recognize
And
the
that's
true labor
something
market.
that we as a board in future can have a conversation around, maybe making modifications to those comparator groups.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is part of the conversation, at least that I've heard, that you would like to have relative to the policy revision work that Mercer is going to support you with.
Ms. Gallegos?
So kind of following along Sharon's questions about what's included. So I get total cash, and I get total comp is cash plus the incentive compensation. I thought I read somewhere, and been reading so much, I can't remember where it was. Where do we include the value of the pension plans, for example, both here and of our comparator groups? Pension plans and other benefits that we provide.
So we do not collect that, or we do not put that out in this compensation data. It's hard to quantify as everyone is different, so that would be hard for us to put out in terms of this type of a report. We've tried to quantify it in the past and found that it was a bit negligible, but from the survey perspective and this market data, it is not included.
Okay. Neither in the STRS numbers, nor
Correct.
the
Not-
investment bank numbers, nor the other.
Correct, neither in the market or for CalSTRS, it's
Okay.
included.
So there's and negligible, how do you determine that it's negligible that we provide retirement to, I mean, this is what we do.
Right. No, when
It
we,
seems odd to call it negligible.
it was years ago, there was a team that was trying to, and we can dig into it more, to try to quantify, but it was looking within the private sector, there's DC plans, there's other benefits that are added in there, and just trying to figure that out for a competitive market. There wasn't really a way to do that in terms of a true comparison.
Okay.
Just to add a little more color to this, in 2017, we did ask McLaughlin to cost that out. And it was essentially a wash because there are additional benefits provided, such as 401k match, that kind of did, as Maureen indicated, equalized the benefits. I have the information, Deborah, and I'm happy to share it with you and the rest of the committee as a refresher.
Great. Thank you.
And just two comments on that, Ms. Gallegos. One would be on a forward-looking basis, I don't think it precludes this board from saying, we want to look at that value. We do believe there is value to it. And then the second one is Governor Brown's pension reforms. So there are newer employees whose benefit is different. Yeah, so that's, I think, a factor that is living and breathing and that we should think about as well. Okay, Mr. Juarez.
Relative to, are you familiar with similar comparisons done with state employees outside of CalSTRS for state departments? And I'm asking because I'm wondering if any such comparisons also include benefits or not.
Not from a McLaughlin perspective. We focus on the public pension funds from an investment standpoint. I can follow up with an Aon if we have something similar, but to my knowledge, no.
Yeah, because that
Might
would,
with an
in my
Aon.
mind, Harry, that would drive whether or not we wanted to go there relative to CalSTRS. And Crystal, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
You know, it's an interesting question. I have tried to comb CalHR's website to understand kind of what is the state philosophy and look at the salary surveys. It's interesting. They don't have a regular scheduled cadence of how they run the surveys, and they're collecting federal government data, I believe. And so I don't quite know if it takes into account salary and benefit. It's very, I know my staff is sitting in the back of the room and they're probably laughing because we have tried to look into that and the data is just not there. It's not very transparent.
Yeah, and I guess the question would be, then do we include health benefits? Because that's a substantial investment in our employees. If we're going to go there, you got to do the whole 9 yards as far as I'm concerned. So I'll just leave that out there. I know we're not there yet, but something to think about.
Any other members of the committee that have questions on the data presentation? Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it over to Josh and Susan from Mercer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Waiting to change presentation. Yes. As you mentioned, Mercer did have the chance to review the report prepared by McLaughlin, and we had a chance to ask questions directly about the data and the methodologies used in that review. Following our review, we do include here 2 sets of recommendations, both for salary range adjustments and potential incentive plan adjustments as well to align with your policy. So from the salary ranges, in the policy, base salary ranges have specific minimums and maximums and will be established using market data from the compensation comparator groups that are defined in the policy. Base salary levels for each position will be targeted at the midpoint of the salary range. And so the policy states that the organization targets the middle of the market. So the goal under the policy is to align the middle of the market with the middle of the salary ranges. Based on the review conducted by McLaughlin, there are gaps between your current salary ranges and the market data for some positions. And we do support the recommendation to make adjustments to align with your policy. It is proposed to have those updated salary ranges effective as of February 1st. That, as a reminder, a change to the salary ranges does not indicate changes to any base salaries. That is a separate conversation. This is just updating the salary ranges. For example, that would allow, if there was trying to recruit for an open position, to allow to use that updated salary range in that recruitment process, for example. Here we've summarized the recommendations and from the McLaughlin report on one page. We have the executive management and investment staff. You can see that we have there is a recommendation for increases to the salary ranges for 3 of the executive management roles and for 4 of the investment staff positions. So again, this would be an increase to the salary ranges. To the left of the screen, you have the current salary ranges, the minimum, midpoint, and maximum. In the middle red column, we have the median data from the McLaughlin report. And then to the right, we have the proposed salary ranges. You can see in the far right column where there is a proposed change to the ranges to align with the market data. In addition, as provided by the policy, your cash compensation is targeted at the median of the market. And so when we look at the combination of base salary and current incentive opportunities, there is a proposal to increase the incentive maximums under your plan to align your maximum total cash compensation with the market data that McLaughlin has provided for market total cash compensation. This is aligned with the methodology that you've used in the past to compare your cash compensation to the total cash compensation data within the McLaughlin report. And the proposal for this would be not go into effect until July 1st for the next fiscal year. This would not be something that would change the current ongoing fiscal year. One note is that historically the general counsel has not been included in the incentive plan, and that has resulted in a higher base salary to offset the lack of incentive for that role. We have recommended considering inclusion of the general counsel in the incentive plan to avoid over-indexing the base salary beyond the market levels there, but being consistent with your policy of being at the market median for total compensation.
And just as for context, we do see the general counsel and other state pension plans being included in the incentive. So that would not put you as an outlier. That would probably put you more in the norm for those. What you're seeing here is the data around the incentive proposed increases. To read this chart, you have the jobs on the left, the current incentive maximums in the third column from the left, so 150 for the CEO. The next 2 columns show you the proposed increase, if there is one, and then those are bolded. If there's an increase, it's the same number if it's not bolded. And then what that total cash number would get you to, how it compares to the McLaughlin number, which is in red, and the percentage change. And one note, you looked at this in 2024, you probably looked at it in 2022 as well, and no changes were made. I noted that in 2024, it was pointed out that not doing this puts you below the market from about 10 or 15% below market levels, but no changes were made. So it's not surprising to me that after 5 to 7 years, depending on which positions we're talking about, you're falling a little bit behind on the maximums. Now, they have to earn the maximums, right? So just in terms of, this is not what they get, this is what the maximum would be if everything goes perfectly. So if you hit a home run every time, this is what you would get, but no one hits a home run every time. So just as a note, those increases would get you very close to the market of total cash.
Seems like Shohei Ohtani hits a home run every time.
Feels like it.
And the Dodgers have a
If you're
payroll
not
of
a
like
Dodgers
$2
fan, it is
billion.
every time.
And I was at the game when he hit 3 in the playoffs. It's amazing.
So I want to move on from this to introduce the concept of total cash compensation versus total compensation. Now, your policy does not state actually what you are comparing against. It says you're comparing against the market. It's been interpreted that the market is market total cash compensation. So what you're seeing here in the diagram, it's the boxes on the left side there, the green box and the blue box. Green is salary, and then the blue is the variable annual incentive, so bonus. A number of organizations in your peer group, particularly the private companies, the Canadian organizations, depending on endowments, corporate pension plans, et cetera, and now some public pension funds are including what you see in the yellow box in the right-hand column, long-term incentives or deferred compensation. And so those two numbers are different. Total cash compensation is what you've been looking at, and traditionally that's what you've been benchmarking against. And the idea here is to point out to you that they're more and more prominently, we're seeing the idea of total compensation is what you're competing against and recruiting against and trying to retain against in the marketplace, which includes what you currently have, but also includes a third leg of the stool, which is that yellow, which is total long-term incentives added on to all that. And as you might imagine, those pieces are fairly significant. And that's what we show here on page 8. What we have here in the two red columns, the first one is total cash, so salary plus annual bonuses. And then the column to the right of that, market total compensation, that's salary, bonuses, and long-term incentives. And then the gap between those two is the next two columns in both dollars and percentages. And you can see, and this is not surprising if you're familiar with executive pay, long-term incentives make up a big piece of the pay puzzle for senior level employees. In publicly traded companies, those numbers could be 70 or 80% of the total. What you're seeing here is somewhere in a 45 to 30% gap between total cash and total compensation. And more, that's what the staff is recruiting against and having to protect from is the numbers that could show up in that second column there with the big gaps that you're seeing. So the last steps we have is asking for your approval on two elements. The first one is moving the salary ranges that were discussed as appropriate. As Susan mentioned, they would go into effect February 1st, which does not mean any necessarily salary changes February 1st, but would help recruit. And the second ask is for approval of the new annual incentive maximums for certain positions, which again would be very helpful in recruiting. To reemphasize, those would not go into effect until July 1st of 2026. The first possible payout for those would be in the fall of 2027, so about 18 months from now. So from a timing perspective, we're looking forward on this one. Again, and the idea is to help recruit. And then, as been mentioned several times, Mercer is going to be conducting a policy review in the coming months where we will interview all the board members to understand your views on things like the comparator group. Whether we should be looking at this total comp or we should stick with looking at just total cash. Should we be looking at the median of the market even though you're the second largest pension plan in the United States? Those kinds of questions, they've been answered before, but I don't think this board inside has been asked recently. So we want to get your input on this to see what might make sense to change, or maybe we leave it alone. But that's the work we're going to do over the next few months. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Josh. Let's go to Steve Juarez, Deborah Gallegos, and Sharon Hendricks. Steve.
We talked a little bit on our briefing call about long-term incentives and deferred comp or deferred incentives, deferrals. And so I'm curious, and maybe this requires you to look through your crystal ball, but if we were to go in that direction, is it your sense that that would probably generate a higher award for the people that were subject to LTI or deferrals? Because now we're taking into account another form of compensation, as opposed to displacing the current annual incentives and compensation.
Yes. Compensation would go up if you try to match the total market.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Ms. Gallegos?
So I just have a few questions on issues I want to reconnect on here. So we're talking about ranges right now, right? So when we go out to recruit, I'm assuming we don't automatically offer at the top of the range.
Correct.
So we're still at the range and recruiting, we could potentially hire somebody at the top of our existing range, would get them to the median of a new range, right? So we're not constrained in our ability to offer potential employees more than the median
Correct.
at the moment.
That is
right?
correct.
Okay. So we do have that flexibility currently.
We do.
Okay. That was one thing. And I think you did answer, our reviewing the policy is happening over the next few months?
Correct.
Okay. And it seems like from the long-term incentive, that's going to be our biggest ability to draw. Would you agree with that? To potentially draw new
For
employees?
certain positions, it's a significant piece of the puzzle.
It's a significant based on a new, if that's the way we chose to go, it would be a
Right.
new, pretty sizable piece of the puzzle.
You don't have to do it in the long, I mean, you could, in theory, if you look at this diagram up there, you could expand your blue box to equal the market's blue and yellow if you wanted to.
Okay.
There's different ways to get there. All
Yeah.
we're saying is from a, equity standpoint, if you're trying to match the market, you're currently trailing it. And the way other people do it is by having this third element. That doesn't mean you have to. You could do it all on base salary.
Yeah.
Wouldn't recommend it necessarily, but you could do it all on base salary.
And the long-term would presumably also tie more of our performance to compensation.
Yes, it would be paid for
As we would
performance.
see more in the 33% of investment banks, insurance companies, et cetera, is more typical. Is that correct?
Correct, yes,
Yeah.
it's pay for performance. Either it's the vesting is usually 3 or 4 years, and it goes up or down based on the fund's performance.
Okay. I guess I'd like to study this a little bit more. It was news to us that it was coming on this agenda item. We understand oversights happen, but this was supposed to be brought in March and then for a first reading and then voted on in May. The controller still has a lot of questions about this, and given we're doing the policy review in the next few months where we could really have a significant impact, and we do have the flexibility, and we're not tying our hands with respect to new recruits. I would just ask for a little bit more time, if it pleased the rest of the committee and the chair to study this a little bit more, given it was new to us. We really just got this 10 days ago. I didn't realize it was brought forward in the work plan. So I would just ask that we consider this a first reading and be allowed to consider it further, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gallegos. I didn't hear it as a formal motion, but what I would like to do is kind of get a sense of where other committee members are on that request. And as I think about it, I think about the two actions that are being asked, so I'm going to just add some context. The salary ranges, and which is our numbers.
Yes.
And I think on the recruitment issue, the ability to offer something at the higher ranges may, I don't know, but it may create internal issues where you may have people who are at a lower part of the range who have been here longer, and you hire someone. So that's a factor, I think, in that. And then the second part, and that would be, the ranges would be as an effective February 1st at the discretion of our CEO. The second part of the recommendation are around the incentives and the implications, which would be effective July 1st. So from my vantage point, that actually provides ample opportunity to meet the controller's request on that second part. So I'm just adding that as part of your, so let's see how other members of the committee are thinking about this. Ms. Hendricks, then Ms. Juarez, then Ms. Perot. Sharon?
Yeah, to your point, Harry, I was curious if we could parse out this item and actually, so I don't know if we can, so Brian, listen to.
No, I think we can. Brian
Yeah.
will keep us.
So my recommendation would be, to your comments, Harry, to approve, we'll call it like Part A, the increase in the base salary ranges that are effective February 1st, and then to take the second part, the increase in max incentive, and to Deborah's request, having a little more time to, and then ensuring that the board takes the time and energy to get those questions answered in between now and our next meeting, or whenever we decide to have the next, conversation about this. So that would be my motion, is to approve Part A of the base salary ranges and to defer the max incentive decision to the next meeting, or whatever is appropriate to Mr. Chair.
Okay. So that was a formal motion, and there was a second that came from Mr. Juarez. So I think procedurally, we have to discuss that motion. Is that correct? So the motion is limited, the discussion at this point, I'm going to get to you 1 second, Scott. The motion at this point procedurally is we will only discuss the motion, which is to move forward with the salary ranges recommendation. And that's the focus of this discussion. And then we'll either vote that up or vote that down, and then we'll see where we are at that point, procedurally. Is that, Brian, am I within the proper governance? Great. Scott, you wanted to, Scott?
I just wanted to weigh in a little bit with the risk and the urgency. And I think, in general, you always want to take time to assess decisions and make the right decisions. I can't argue with that, but I do feel compelled to say that there is a large mismatch between the market and some of these market compensation and the positions, and that gap is very large. It's anywhere between 33 and 119% across the investment divisions. And so to me, this poses a lot of risk for the organization, risk of retention, but also risk of recruitment. And so if I looked at some of those positions that we look to recruit for, yeah, again, 95% off the market. And so I think there's some urgency and risk here that haven't been on the table in the prior periods when we've been assessing this. There, a lot, if I were to draw the larger framework, we're trying to match the size and the complexity of what we do with the appropriate resources. And we've done a great job, that we've been really successful over time. We're close to $400 billion, 65% of our assets are estimated to be managed internally versus 50% for the market. We do roughly 48% more complex, private markets and alternative assets. And so do we have, and will we continue to have, the right resources to manage that? I think there's some risk here in retention and recruiting if the gap is too large with compensation. And I just want to make those points.
Thank you, Scott. So it's Steve, then Michelle, Michael, and Deborah. Steve?
Yeah, thank you. So when we did our briefing, I asked the question why we were doing this in January versus the scheduled March 1st reading and May, and I was told partially, and it probably speaks to Scott's point, we were looking at positions where in order to hire people at the right level, we needed to move, at least in terms of the salary issue, we needed to move sooner rather than later.
Correct.
I'm going to look to you and ask you, is that still correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Just adding on to what Scott shared, I think this is just an interesting metric. The investment branch has very high retention and very low turnover, which is a bonus, but they also have the highest vacancy rate of the entire organization at almost 15%. And they are obviously promoting internally to ensure that they have, the skill set that they need to keep growing the funds, but they're also recruiting externally. 35% of people that are hired are coming from the outside. As comparison, CalSTRS overall, our vacancy rate is 8.5%. So it's a significant difference. Just another data point.
Thanks for the additional information. And let's go to Michelle, Michael, and Deborah. And a reminder, we're focusing on this motion that's on the floor. Michelle.
Okay,
There you go,
there we
Michelle.
I was like, I
There we
was
go.
pushing
That's
the
me.
button. I thought I was getting it right, but who knows? Okay, well, I do have comments on both, but I can bifurcate those, given the motion. I hear the comment on retention, and I guess one, also note that we don't seem to have a huge retention issue writ large. I think, that is obviously a driving factor if we start to see, employees in either in one sector of our, one department or one area all leaving. I think that is an indicator, right? That's something you'd have to absolutely look into. But I just want to reiterate, I think, again, just related to the base salary comment made earlier by my colleague, Ms. Gallegos, that it appears, based on the data, that while yes, perhaps both in the investment team and with our executive staff, that our mid-range is probably not where the mid-range is per industry, that the tops of the ranges, and again, I'm just looking at the base piece, are reachable within the mid-range of what is industry sort of standard. And so I guess I would kind of argue that I'm not sure I understand the need to move this quickly today and be effective basically Sunday, even on the base salary piece, when we do still have some flexibility and we really have very low need of retention. We're not recruiting actively, except for, I know we do have the one position that, we've spoken about. So I have some concerns there. Again, I just would be remiss, and you won't be surprised this is coming from my mouth, that this is, I think about timing. And we have, when we're talking about base salary, we have the majority of our employees that work for us who are not within these two pots of individuals who will not be seeing essentially a base salary increase until 2028. And so I'm just very mindful, again, never wanting to undercut the value of our top employees and what they need to bring to the table. But for me, the combination of the fact that those base salaries, even with our current ranges, are, we can attain a higher level if we needed to hire above midpoint, given the current ranges. The low retention and the fact that we do have this other factor of the majority of our employees not seeing a base salary increase is concerning for me. So, and I'll leave it at that. I have some comments about the investment piece, but I'll wait till we get to that section. I mean the incentive piece.
All right.
Sorry.
Thanks, Michelle.
Just a quick point of clarification, and I'm sorry if I misspoke, Ms. Peralt, but
Of course.
we are actively recruiting in the investment branch. We're not just one. We have 49 vacancies.
That's fine.
Okay.
But I think my comment
Point taken.
still stands.
Yep.
Yep. Thank you.
Ms. Gallegos.
Yeah, I think Ms. Perot stated most of the things that I was going to state, but just a few others. One, I think we are in a different environment now in terms of the potential market out there. A lot of people are looking for jobs now, so I think maybe the potential is out there, but without going out, we don't know. Two, I would just ask that in the future, when we do expedite items, they be flagged for us, particularly as chair and vice chair, so that we can prepare more appropriately going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Gallegos. Mr. Gunning?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple comments. I'm in support of the motion, but I'm actually struck by Ms. Gallegos' comments about the inclusion of retirement, given we are thinking about long-term incentives. And I guess I'd want more of that discussion. I know it's hard to compare because everyone does it differently, but if we are thinking about incentives, I think that is part of the package and probably would want to see more discussion around that, which then leads me to support of the motion because we do want to talk through LTI and those other things. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gunning. Don't see any other committee members in the queue. Motion on the floor. And before we go to the motion on the floor, are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this item?
There are no members of the public in the queue for this item.
Thank you. So no other members of the committee are in the queue. The motion on the floor made by Sharon and seconded by Steve Juarez is to approve the recommendation by Mercer to adjust the salary ranges. So as presented, and that's at this, the effective date is at the discretion of our CEO per policy, and I think it says February 1st. I think I captured the motion correctly, and if so, can we take a roll call?
Just a clarification for base, right?
Yes, yes.
want to indicate that.
Oh, yeah,
You said as recommended. I just want to make sure.
yeah, just the base salary ranges, yes.
Correct.
Okay,
Mr. Juarez?
Aye, but why am I going first all of a sudden?
It's just easier for me to go around that way.
I've always been last. It gives me time to think, but go ahead. I'm an aye.
I can go a different way. For the Director of Finance, Ms. Peralt?
Abstain.
For the State Controller, Ms. Gallegos?
Abstain.
Great. Mr. Tang?
Yes.
Ms. Hendricks?
Yes.
Mr. Gunning?
Yes.
Chairperson Keeley, would you like to vote?
aye. So for the second portion of the motion, or the recommendation, that it relates to the incentives that are being recommended by Mercer. Ms. Gallegos, on behalf of the Controller's Office, has suggested, as requesting that the information be brought back in March, and a reminder to the committee that the recommendation effective date would be July 1st, with the first action not until July 1st of 2027. So the request from a governance perspective is more information, more time before we make that decision. So open up to some discussion on that. Ms. Hendricks.
Okay. My only request is just that, we as a board, I still have some questions as well. So just that we do the work that we need to do between now and the next meeting so that we can come and at least, we might disagree on the decision, but just be ready for a decision at the next meeting. I do have an information request, if I may, Harry, around, and you tell me where this goes, but I think, Crystal, since we are going to talk about the comparator groups at some point, I would be curious about where we are recruiting from on for investment staff. So if we could get data maybe over the last 5 years or whatever you think would give us a good sense of where are we recruiting from? Private, public, CalPERS, smaller boutique.
Yep.
It would just be good to have
Some data.
some data on that.
Sure.
So thank
Okay.
you. Yep.
Thanks, Sharon. Ms. Peralt.
Yes, so the second part of I wanted to keep it separated on the incentive piece. And maybe this is also maybe a little bit of a gathering of information as well, specifically around adding, and I think I just need a more understanding on this, but on the thinking and the why, particularly long-term, but on the incentive suggestion for general counsel. That seems a little unusual. Maybe I'm wrong, but it would be helpful to sort of understand why we're suggesting adding an incentive to the general counsel versus just continuing to look at a base salary range change there. I think, again, sensitive when we have positions that statewide exist in multiple statewide organizations that are similar and the same. This seems like it's a little bit of a step outside of that frame and approach. So if we could just sort of add that to some of the follow-up, that would be, I think, helpful. Again, we're just sensitive when we have positions that exist in other organizations within the government frame and kind of the understanding of why those need to be dealt with differently here, or even, again, if maybe the comparators have reasons why as well, it would be helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Pearl. Any other questions, comments? Is there any opposition to the request made by Ms. Gallegos to have this portion of the item to come back with additional information for March? I see no one in the queue, so that is the direction we will take, and we have our agenda for March. So anything else for this item for the good of the order discussion? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your input. Thank you, Maureen, for making it out from Philly with the weather. Josh and Susan, your travels as well. Crystal.
Would the committee like an update, if available, on the work relative to the policy revision in March as well? Or would you prefer that be deferred to later time?
Let's put that off.
Okay.
Till later. I think this one item itself will generate a lot of discussion, and there'll be quite a bit of, I think, hopefully, dialogue with the committee members well in advance, so that we all have appropriate information with confidence, we can make a decision. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Which goes to item 3 in the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes without objection. Okay, the minutes from September have been approved. Can we review the information requests?
There's just the one from Ms. Hendricks requesting data to show where CalSTRS is recruiting for the positions before the committee right now.
I also captured, thank you, Braden, maybe some additional data around incentivizing general counsel positions. Yep. And then it's not really an information request, but I'm considering it an information request, sharing out the 2017 costing data with the committee members relative to defined benefits and other perks.
Yeah, I would lean towards more information versus less for deliberations on the item. Thank you, Crystal. Steve?
Yeah, I'm curious, looking at the agenda for next meeting. So now we're bringing back the second part of the item from today.
Yeah.
But we're also then have policies and procedures discussion first reading. And I'm just wondering how those are juxtaposed against one another and whether or not there needs to be further massaging of those two things.
I just heard from Mr. Chair, I'm sorry for interrupting,
No,
that
please.
perhaps we're putting off the first read of policy revision.
Okay, so that wouldn't be on the agenda for the
Not for March.
meeting. Okay.
Would
Although
be,
I think we remain flexible. I think if we think, if someone says, hey, you might want to think it this way, it might be better if we did have both, we certainly can do that, right? So why don't we leave it for now, and if we want to pull it, we can pull it.
Okay.
And perhaps if you get some feedback from other committee members that are compelling, we can help make that decision, and working closely with Deborah and the controller. Okay?
thank you.
All right. Any members of the public that would like to comment on any of the items from this morning?
There are no members of the public in the queue.
Thank you. The committee is adjourned.